The stars had never seemed so cold to Katie Morgan as they did on that terrible morning. She stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Vessel Horizon, her hands gripping the railing so hard that her knuckles turned white. Through the massive viewing window, she could see them coming. Thousands of alien warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, emerged from the darkness of space like a swarm of angry wasps. The Valorian Dominion had arrived, and they had come to conquer Earth. Admiral Daniel Price stood beside her, his weathered face showing no fear despite the impossible odds they faced. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm blue eyes that had seen many battles during his 40 years of service. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for this moment. "How many ships?" Katie asked, though she already knew the answer would be bad. 3,000 and counting," replied Luis Ramirez from the communications station. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "They're still coming through." Katie felt her stomach drop. Earth's entire combined fleet consisted of only 200 vessels. They were outnumbered 15-1, and that was just the beginning of their problems. The Valorian ships were faster, stronger, and carried weapons that made human technology look like toys. The Valorian Dominion had spent the last century conquering star systems across the galaxy. They had never lost a single battle. Their reputation was one of absolute dominance and merciless efficiency. When they wanted a planet, they took it. When a species resisted, that species was destroyed. Supreme Commander Zoroth watched the human fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Blade. He was a tall creature with dark purple skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. His yellow eyes showed nothing but contempt as he observed the pathetic defensive line the humans had formed around their world. "These creatures are even more primitive than our intelligence suggested," he said to his tactical officer. "Their ships have no quantum shielding. Their weapons are simple kinetic projectiles. This will not be a battle. It will be an extermination." The tactical officer, a younger Valorian named Keth, nodded in agreement. "Our analysis indicates the engagement will last less than 1 hour, Supreme Commander." "Shall we begin?" Zoroth raised one of his clawed hands. "Not yet. We will give them a chance to surrender. The Dominion prefers willing slaves to dead enemies. Dead enemies cannot work in our minds." The transmission reached Earth moments later. It was broadcast on every frequency, interrupting television programs and radio stations across the planet. The alien commander's face appeared on billions of screens, his translated words echoing in every language. "People of Earth," Zoroth announced, "you have 12 hours to surrender unconditionally. If you comply, your species will be allowed to live as servants of the Valorian Dominion. If you resist, your world will burn and your species will be forgotten. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. You have 12 hours." The transmission ended, leaving behind a world in chaos. In Geneva, Switzerland, the United Earth Council gathered in emergency session. Representatives from every nation on the planet sat in the great circular chamber, their faces showing various degrees of fear, anger, and despair. President Hannah Cole stood at the central podium, trying to maintain her composure as she addressed the assembly. "We have received the alien ultimatum," she said, her voice steady despite the terror she felt inside. "They want us to surrender. They want us to become their slaves. I have called this session to hear your thoughts, but I want you to know mine first." She paused, looking around at the frightened faces before her. "I say we fight. I say we show these aliens that humanity will not go quietly into the night. Even if we cannot win, we can make them pay for every inch of ground they take. We can show them that humans are not easy prey." The chamber erupted in argument. Some representatives agreed with her passionate words. Others insisted that surrender was the only way to save the human race. The debate grew heated and desperate as the minutes ticked away. But while the politicians argued, something else was happening far beneath the Nevada desert. Dr. Samuel Grant sat in the control room of a facility that did not officially exist. He was a thin man in his 60s, with wild gray hair and tired eyes that had spent too many years staring at computer screens and alien artifacts. Around him, dozens of scientists and technicians worked frantically at their stations. "How much time do we need?" asked General Patricia Webb, the military liaison for the project. Samuel rubbed his eyes and sighed. The system is ready. We've been ready for 3 years. The question is not whether we can activate it. The question is whether we should. Patricia frowned. We're facing extinction, Doctor. I think we're past the point of should. You don't understand what this weapon can do, Samuel replied quietly. What it really does? We're not just firing a gun here. We're changing the rules of reality itself. The species that created this technology used it to build an empire that lasted 100,000 years. And then one day they simply vanished. Every single one of them. Gone. Erased from existence. We still don't know exactly what happened, but we know it had something to do with this weapon. Patricia placed her hand on his shoulder. Samuel, I've read your reports. I know the risks. But if we don't use it, there won't be anyone left to worry about the consequences. Sometimes you have to gamble everything on a single throw of the dice. On the horizon, Katie Morgan received orders that changed her life forever. She was being transferred to a different ship, a small cargo vessel called the Dawn. The orders came directly from the highest levels of command, marked with security classifications she had never seen before. What's really going on? She asked Admiral Price before she left. The old admiral looked at her with eyes full of sorrow and hope. You're going to save us all, Katie, or die trying. I wish I could tell you more, but I don't know much myself. Just know that everything depends on you now. Everything. Katie wanted to ask more questions, but there was no time. She gathered her few belongings and boarded the shuttle that would take her to the Dawn. As she flew away from the horizon, she looked back at the fleet she was leaving behind. 200 ships against 3,000. Her friends and colleagues were about to fight a battle they could not win, unless whatever waited for her on the Dawn could change the odds. The shuttle docked with the Dawn 30 minutes later. From the outside, the ship looked like any other cargo freighter, battered and unremarkable. But as Katie stepped inside, she immediately knew that appearances were deceiving. The interior of the ship had been completely redesigned. Where cargo holds should have been, there was now a massive chamber filled with equipment she did not recognize. Strange symbols covered the walls, symbols that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. And at the center of everything sat a device that made her breath catch in her throat. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A perfect sphere of dark metal covered in patterns that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them. The air around it felt charged with energy, making her skin tingle. "Welcome aboard," said a voice behind her. She turned to find a young man with dark hair and nervous eyes. "I'm Nathan Perry, your co-pilot. And that thing you're looking at is either going to save humanity or destroy us all. We're not really sure which yet." Katie stared at the device for a long moment. "What is it?" Nathan smiled grimly. "We call it the Architect's Gift, and you're going to learn how to use it in about 6 hours. Hope you're a fast learner." Outside, the Valorian fleet continued its approach, and the clock kept ticking toward 0, 20 years before the Valorians arrived to conquer Earth. A mining ship called the Northern Star was drilling through the frozen surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The crew was tired and bored after months of work, searching for rare minerals that Earth's growing industries desperately needed. They expected to find ice, rock, and maybe some valuable metals. What they found instead changed the course of human history. The drill broke through into a hollow, spaced 3 kilometers beneath the surface. When the crew sent cameras down to investigate, they discovered something impossible. Buried in the ancient ice was a spacecraft, one that had clearly been there for a very long time. Dr. Samuel Grant was a young scientist back then. Working for the United Nations Space Agency as a specialist in xenobiology, he was one of the first experts called to Titan when news of the discovery reached Earth. He remembered stepping into the frozen cavern for the first time, seeing the alien ship resting in its tomb of ice, and feeling like the entire universe had suddenly become much larger and much stranger. The ship was 400,000 years old. Samuel explained to Katie as they stood in the chamber aboard the Dawn. "That's older than human civilization. Older than our species, really. When the beings who built this ship were flying between stars, Our ancestors were living in caves and hunting with stone tools. Katie listened carefully, trying to absorb everything he was telling her. She had only 6 hours to understand technology that humanity had spent 20 years studying. We called them the architects, Samuel continued, because their technology was so advanced that it seemed like they could build anything. Their ship was damaged beyond repair, but we found fragments of their equipment, pieces of their computers, and most importantly, parts of their weapon systems. He gestured toward the dark sphere at the center of the chamber. That is the result of 2 decades of research. We reverse-engineered it from what we found on Titan. It took 7 scientists their lives to understand even a fraction of how it works. Katie approached the sphere slowly, feeling the strange energy that surrounded it. What does it do? Samuel took a deep breath. In simple terms, it changes the rules of physics in a localized area. Everything in the universe follows certain laws, constants that never change. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, they all work according to fixed rules. But this device can alter those rules within a specific zone. You could see the confusion on her face and try to explain more simply. Imagine you're playing a game of chess, and suddenly you can change how the pieces move. Your opponent's queen can no longer cross the entire board. Their knights can only move in one direction. Meanwhile, your pieces still work normally because you understand the new rules and they don't. Katie nodded slowly. So we use this to change the rules so that Valorian technology stops working. Exactly. Their ships use quantum singularities for power, tiny controlled black holes. Their weapons and shields depend on precise physical constants to function. If we alter those constants even slightly, their technology becomes useless. But our ships, which use simpler systems that we've already modified to work under the changed conditions, will still function. It sounded almost too good to be true, and Katie said so. Samuel's face grew serious. There's a reason we've kept this secret for 20 years. Katie, there's a reason we didn't just announce to the galaxy that we had this power. The architects were not destroyed by an external enemy. They were destroyed by their own creation. He walked over to a computer terminal and brought up images on the screen. They showed ancient ruins on distant planets, worlds that had been twisted and broken in ways that defied explanation, mountains that flowed like water and then froze in impossible shapes, oceans that had turned to glass, continents that had been folded in on themselves like paper. The architects didn't just build weapons, Samuel said quietly. They tried to reshape reality itself. They became gods, or at least they thought they did. And then something went wrong. We found their message in the wreckage on Titan, a warning for any species that might follow them. Katie stared at the images of destroyed worlds. What happened to them? We don't know exactly. The message was incomplete, corrupted by time. But the warning was clear enough. The power to change reality is the power to destroy it. They pushed too far, tried to alter too much, and reality pushed back. An entire civilization, millions of years of history and achievement, erased in an instant. Nathan Perry had been listening from across the room. That's why the weapon we built is limited, he added. Dr. Grant designed it with restrictions built in. It can only affect a certain area. It can only change constants by a certain amount. Any more than that, and we risk triggering the same catastrophe that killed the architects. Katie understood now why she had been chosen for this mission. She had degrees in theoretical physics and years of combat training. She was one of the few people who could understand both the science and the stakes. How do I use it? She asked. Samuel led her to a chair positioned directly beneath the sphere. Neural interface cables hung from the ceiling like mechanical vines. The device responds to consciousness. You'll connect your mind to it directly and control its functions through thought. The training program we developed will teach your brain the patterns needed to activate and direct the weapon. He hesitated before continuing. I won't lie to you, Katie. The process is painful, and it's dangerous. 3 of the 12 pilots we trained suffered permanent brain damage. 2 others died during testing. But you're our best chance. Your neural patterns showed the highest compatibility with the system. Katie sat down in the chair. And if I succeed, if I can use this weapon against the Valorians, Then you might save 8 billion lives, Samuel answered. But you have to understand something else. Using the device takes an enormous toll on the human body. The longer you maintain the field, the more damage you do to yourself. If you push too hard or too long, your brain will simply burn out. She looked up at the sphere above her, at the shifting patterns on its surface. Somewhere out there, 3,000 enemy ships were preparing to destroy everything she had ever known. Her family in Boston, her friends in the fleet, every person she had ever met or loved. "Let's begin," she said. The neural cables connected to ports behind her ears, ports that had been surgically installed years ago as part of her training. The world dissolved into light and sound and sensation as the architect's technology touched her mind. For the next 6 hours, Katie learned things that no human being had ever known. She learned to feel the fabric of reality itself, to sense the invisible forces that held the universe together. She learned to push against those forces, to bend them, to reshape them. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was like being born again into a universe that was infinitely more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. When the training ended and the cables disconnected, she found tears streaming down her face. Nathan helped her stand, supporting her weight as her legs trembled from exhaustion. "How do you feel?" Samuel asked anxiously. Katie wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I feel like I can see the strings that hold the universe together, and I think I know how to cut them." On the horizon, Admiral Price watched the countdown timer approach 0. The 12 hours were almost over. Earth had refused to surrender. Now it was time to fight. He gave the order for the fleet to move forward, knowing that most of his ships would not survive the coming battle. But somewhere out there, hidden among the stars, a small cargo ship called the Dawn carried humanity's last hope. Price just had to buy them enough time to use it. He announced over the fleet channel, "Engage the enemy. Make them pay for every inch." 200 human vessels accelerated toward 3,000 Valorian warships, and the battle for Earth began. The first human ship to die was the Valiant, a destroyer that had served Earth's fleet for 15 years. A Valorian disruptor beam cut through its shields like they were made of paper and split the vessel in half. The 200 crew members aboard had no time to reach escape pods. They were simply gone, transformed into scattered atoms in the cold emptiness of space. Admiral Price watched from the bridge of the horizon as more of his ships began to fall. The Defender, the Resolution, the Braveheart, names he had known for years, crews he had trained and commanded, disappearing one by one in flashes of brilliant light. "Maintain formation," he ordered, keeping his voice steady despite the horror he felt. "Draw them in. Make them commit their forces." The strategy was simple and brutal. Price could not win this battle through conventional means. His only goal was to make the Valorians believe they were winning easily, to make them push forward eagerly, to bring as many of their ships as possible into the trap that waited for them. Supreme. Commander Zoreth watched the human fleet crumble with growing satisfaction. His tactical displays showed enemy ships dying by the dozens, while his own forces suffered almost no casualties. It was exactly as he had predicted. "These creatures are even weaker than I expected," he said to his officers. "They fight bravely, I will give them that, but bravery is no substitute for superior technology. Signal the reserve fleet to advance. Let us finish this quickly." More Valorian ships poured through the gap in space that their hyperspace engines had created. Another 1,000 vessels joined the battle, eager to participate in the destruction of yet another inferior species on the Dawn. Katie Morgan felt the vibrations of distant explosions through the hull of her ship. Nathan Perry had positioned them carefully within a field of debris from destroyed human vessels, hiding their energy signature among the scattered wreckage. Through the sensors, she could see the battle unfolding. 60% of our fleet is gone," Nathan reported, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "The Valorians are pushing hard. They've got at least 2,000 ships within the target zone now." Katie closed her eyes and focused on the neural link that connected her to the architect weapon. She could feel its power humming in her mind, waiting to be released. But she held back. They needed more enemy ships in the zone. They needed to make this count. "Wait," she whispered, more to herself than to Nathan. Just a little longer. Admiral Price's flagship shuddered as a glancing blow from an enemy weapon scraped along its shields. The Horizon was one of the largest vessels in the human fleet. But even it could not stand long against Valorian firepower. Admiral called out his tactical officer. We've lost 72% of our forces. If we don't retreat now, we won't have anything left. Right? We're not retreating. We're the bait, and the fish haven't fully taken it yet. Signal all remaining ships to fall back toward Earth. Make it look like we're trying to protect the planet. The Valorians will follow. The surviving human ships began a controlled retreat, drawing the Valorian fleet after them like a matador pulling a bull with a red cape. Zorath saw the maneuver and interpreted it exactly as Price had hoped. They're breaking, the Supreme Commander announced triumphantly. All ships, pursue and destroy. Leave none alive. The massive Valorian fleet surged forward, eager to finish the battle. 2,500 warships now occupied the space between Mars and the asteroid belt, their weapons blazing, their crews celebrating a victory that seemed already certain. None of them noticed the small cargo ship hiding among the debris. None of them detected the strange energy building within its hull. Katie opened her eyes. Now, she said, the architect weapon activated. There was no sound in space, no dramatic explosion or visible shockwave. But something changed. Something fundamental shifted in the fabric of reality itself. Within a sphere 10,000 kilometers in diameter, the laws of physics simply stopped working the way the Valorians expected. The first sign of trouble came from the engine rooms of the Valorian ships. The quantum singularities that powered their vessels began to behave erratically. Energy outputs fluctuated wildly. Containment fields struggled to maintain stability, then the shields failed. Across 2,000 ships, protective barriers that had seemed invincible moments ago flickered and died. Weapon systems shut down as the power supplies that fed them became unreliable. Communications equipment produced nothing but static. Supreme Commander Zorath stared at his displays in complete disbelief. Every reading was wrong. His ship's computer was reporting impossible values for basic physical constants. The speed of light had changed. The gravitational constant had shifted. The electromagnetic force no longer behaved according to known equations. What is happening? He demanded. Report. His officers had no answers. They were as confused as he was. Nothing in their training, nothing in the entire history of the Valorian Dominion had prepared them for this. Admiral Price saw the enemy fleet suddenly go dark. Thousands of warships that had been blazing with deadly fire moments ago were now drifting helplessly. Their power failing, their crews trapped inside metal coffins. All ships, he commanded, his voice rising with fierce hope. Attack! The surviving human vessels turned and charged toward the disabled enemy fleet. Their weapons still worked. Their engines still functioned. They had been modified, prepared for the changed conditions that now paralyzed the Valorians. Plasma cannons that had been useless against Valorian shields now found their targets unprotected. Kinetic projectiles tore through holes that had never felt the impact of conventional weapons. Human pilots screamed in triumph as they destroyed ships that had seemed invincible moments ago. On the dawn, Katie pushed harder. Sweat poured down her face as she maintained the field, keeping the altered physics stable across the massive area of effect. Blood began to trickle from her nose as the strain pushed her body beyond its limits. Nathan watched her with growing concern. Katie, your readings are off the charts. You need to pull back. Can't, she gasped. They're still too strong. Need to keep them down. The Valorians outside the affected zone were beginning to understand what was happening. Supreme Commander Zorath had retreated with his flagship and approximately 1,500 ships that had been at the edge of the battle. From his position of relative safety, he observed the destruction of his fleet with a mixture of fury and fear. What kind of weapon is this? He asked his science officers. They had no explanation. Such technology should not exist. No species in the known galaxy possessed the ability to alter physical constants. It was supposed to be theoretically impossible, but the evidence was right in front of them. 2,000 of their finest warships were being systematically destroyed by a human fleet that should have been nothing more than target practice. "We need to retreat," advised Keth, his tactical officer. "Regroup. Analyze this weapon and find a countermeasure." Zorath's 4 hands clenched into fists. He had never retreated in his entire military career. The thought of fleeing from primitive humans filled him with rage, but he was not a fool. Whatever weapon the humans possessed, it had changed the nature of this battle completely. He needed time to understand what he was facing. "All ships outside the affected zone fall back to safe distance," he ordered reluctantly. "We will return, and when we do, we will make these humans suffer for this humiliation." The surviving Valorian vessels began to withdraw, leaving behind the shattered remains of their fleet. Inside the dawn, Katie felt them retreating and allowed herself a small smile despite the agony coursing through her body. They had won the first round. But she could see on her displays that almost half of the enemy fleet had escaped. They would be back, and next time they would know what to expect. "Nathan," she managed to say through gritted teeth, "how long until they're out of range?" 3 minutes, he replied. "Can you hold on that long?" Katie was not sure. Her vision was starting to blur. Her heart was beating irregularly. The neural connection to the weapon was burning pathways through her brain that were never meant to be used. But she thought about the billions of people on Earth who were counting on her. She thought about her mother and father in Boston, about her younger brother who wanted to be an astronaut someday. She thought about all the crew members who had died buying her the time she needed. 3 minutes, she repeated. "I can do 3 minutes." Outside, the last Valorian ships fled into the darkness of space, leaving behind a graveyard of 2,000 ruined warships. Humanity had won its first victory against an enemy that had never known defeat. But Katie knew. As her consciousness finally faded and the weapon powered down, that this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. Katie woke up in a medical bay with tubes running into her arms and machines beeping steadily beside her bed. Her head felt like it had been split open with an axe. When she tried to move, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. "Don't try to get up," said a familiar voice. Nathan Perry sat in a chair beside her bed, looking almost as exhausted as she felt. "You've been unconscious for 18 hours. The doctors say you're lucky to be alive." Katie swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. "The Valorians. They retreated. We destroyed almost 2,000 of their ships. Admiral Price is calling it the greatest victory in human history." Nathan paused, and his expression grew more serious. "But they'll be back. Our scouts report they're regrouping beyond the asteroid belt. About 1,500 ships remaining. 1,500 ships. Still more than 7 times the size of what remained of Earth's fleet." The weapon had evened the odds considerably, but the battle was far from over. Supreme Commander Zorath stood in the war room of his flagship, surrounded by holographic displays showing the damage to his fleet. 2,000 ships lost. 50,000 Valorian warriors dead. It was the worst defeat in the history of the Dominion. His officers waited nervously for his response. Some of them expected him to rage, to blame them for the disaster. Instead, he remained eerily calm as he studied the data. "This weapon," he said finally, "operates within a limited range. Our analysis suggests a sphere approximately 10,000 kilometers in diameter. Outside that sphere, physics returns to normal." Geth nodded. "That matches our observations, Supreme Commander. Ships that were at the edge of the effect experienced only partial disruption." "Then the solution is simple," Zorath continued. "We attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Their weapon can only cover one area at a time. If we strike from 6 or 8 different vectors, they cannot stop all of us. Some of our forces will reach Earth." It was a brutal calculation. He was accepting that many of his ships would be destroyed by the human weapon, but enough would survive to complete the mission. Even if only a few hundred vessels reached Earth, they would be sufficient to destroy the planet's defenses and conquer the surface. "How long until we can launch the assault?" he asked. "For hours," Keth replied. "We need time to reorganize our formations and coordinate the multi-vector approach." Zorath nodded slowly. "Begin preparations. And this time, there will be no retreat." We will take Earth or die trying. On the Dawn, now docked with the Horizon for emergency repairs, Katie attended a briefing with Admiral Price and Dr. Samuel Grant. The news was not good. Our scouts have detected the enemy fleet moving into attack formation, Price explained, pointing at the tactical display. They're splitting into 8 groups, approaching from different angles. If they all attack at once, the Dawn can only neutralize 1 or 2 of them. The rest will break through. Katie studied the display, her mind still foggy from her ordeal, but gradually clearing. What about our remaining ships? We have 37 combat-capable vessels left, Price replied grimly. Hardly enough to stop 1,500 enemy warships, even if some of them are disrupted by your weapon. Dr. Grant had been silent throughout the briefing, his attention focused on a tablet he was holding. Now he looked up with an expression that was difficult to read. There may be another option, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. When we excavated the architect's ship on Titan, we found more than just the weapon technology. We found a message, a kind of historical record left by the architects before their civilization collapsed. He took a deep breath. The message explained that the architects had seeded their technology throughout the galaxy, hidden caches on hundreds of worlds buried and waiting to be discovered. Katie felt a chill run down her spine. Why would they do that? Because they knew they were going to fall. They knew their civilization was ending. But they hoped that other species might find their technology and use it more wisely than they did. They left instructions, coordinates, and a way to communicate with any other species that might have found these caches. Admiral Price leaned forward. Are you saying there might be other species out there with the same technology we have? Not might be, Samuel replied. There are. I've kept this secret for 20 years because I wasn't sure how to use it. But the architects left a communication frequency, a way to send a signal that would be recognized by anyone who had found their technology. I never used it because I didn't know who might answer. The implications hit Katie like a physical blow. The Valorians have conquered 17 star systems. If any of those species found architect caches, then they would have the same technology we do, Samuel finished. They would have been hiding it, just like us, waiting for the right moment. Price ran his hand through his gray hair. Can you send the signal? Can you reach them? I can try. But there's no guarantee anyone will respond. And even if they do, they might not reach us in time to help. Katie thought about the Valorian fleet preparing to attack, about the 1,500 ships that were coming to destroy everything she loved. They had won one battle, but they were about to face another. And this time, the enemy knew what to expect. Send the signal, she said. We have nothing to lose. Samuel nodded and left the room to prepare the transmission. The next 4 hours were the longest of Katie's life. She returned to the Dawn and reconnected to the architect weapon, preparing herself for another ordeal. Nathan ran diagnostic checks on the ship's systems while trying to keep her spirits up with terrible jokes. Hey, at least we get to die as heroes, he said with a weak smile. That's something, right? I'd rather live as something, Katie replied. Heroes are usually dead. I've noticed that. Tactical display showed the Valorian fleet beginning its approach. 8 separate formations, coming from 8 different directions. Katie could only cover one of them effectively. Maybe 2 if she pushed herself to the limit. But that would leave 6 groups to attack Earth's remaining defenders. Admiral. Price's voice came over the communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Price. The enemy is approaching. We all know the odds. We all know what's at stake. I won't give you any speeches about glory or sacrifice. I'll just say this. We fight for our homes, our families, and our future. Whatever happens today, we make them remember that humans don't surrender. The surviving Earth fleet moved into defensive positions. 37 ships against 1,500, even with the Dawn's weapon, seemed impossible. Katie felt the neural connection activate as she linked her mind to the architect device. The familiar sensation of expanded awareness washed over her, along with the pain she now knew to expect. She could feel the fabric of reality around her, the invisible forces that held the universe together. Enemy fleet will be in weapons range in 3 minutes, Nathan reported. Katie reached out with her mind, targeting the largest Valorian formation. She would stop as many as she could. She would give Earth every chance possible. 2 minutes. She thought about her family in Boston, about Nathan beside her, about Admiral Price and the brave crews of the surviving ships, about 8 billion people on Earth who were counting on her. 1 minute. Then something happened that nobody expected. Space itself seemed to ripple as 17 separate points of light appeared around the battlefield. Ships emerged from those points, ships of designs that no human had ever seen before. Some were sleek and silver. Others were angular and dark. A few seemed to be made of living material that pulsed with inner light. They were not Valorian ships. They were not human ships. They were something else entirely. A transmission reached every vessel in the area, broadcast on the frequency that Dr. Grant had used to send his signal. The voice that spoke was translated into every language simultaneously. "We are the coalition of free worlds. We have heard your call. We have answered. The Valorian Dominion ends today." Katie stared at the display in disbelief as the newcomer vessels took up positions alongside the human fleet. 17 different species, each with their own architect technology, each with their own reasons to fight. The odds had just changed dramatically. Supreme Commander Zoroth watched his tactical displays with growing horror as unknown vessels continued to appear around the battlefield. 17 different species, each with technology that should not exist. His carefully planned multi-vector assault had suddenly become a trap, and he was the one caught inside. "All ships, halt advance," he ordered quickly. "Form defensive positions." But it was too late for defense. The coalition ships were already moving, their weapons charging with energies that made Valorian sensors scream warnings. The Relari were the first to strike. Their silver ships generated the same reality-altering fields that the humans had used, but on a larger scale. 300 Valorian vessels found themselves suddenly powerless, their quantum drives failing, their shields collapsing. Then came the Thornback, a species the Valorians had conquered and enslaved 50 years ago. Their angular black ships carried weapons that fired concentrated streams of antimatter, punching through Valorian hulls like needles through cloth. The Verdani, beings who lived in ships made of genetically modified organic matter, released swarms of living missiles that attached themselves to enemy vessels and began dissolving their hulls with powerful acids. Species after species joined the attack. Some had been conquered by the Dominion. Others had simply lived in fear of eventual invasion. All of them had found the architect caches hidden on their worlds. All of them had been waiting for this moment. Katie watched the battle unfold through her neural link to the Dawn's weapon. She could feel the other reality-altering fields operating across the battlefield, each one maintained by a different pilot, each one covering a different sector. Together, they created a web of altered physics that left the Valorian fleet completely helpless. "This is incredible," Nathan breathed beside her. "They're tearing the Valorians apart." On the horizon, Admiral Price allowed himself a small smile as he watched the destruction of the fleet that had seemed invincible just hours ago. Valorian ships exploded by the hundreds. Escape pods launched in desperate waves as crews abandoned their dying vessels. Supreme Commander Zoroth stood on the bridge of his flagship and knew that the end had come. His fleet was being destroyed around him. His communications were jammed. His weapons were useless. The empire he had served his entire life was crumbling before his eyes. Supreme Commander Keith said quietly, "The Eternal Blade is the last major vessel still operational. Our shields are at 12%. Our weapons are offline. What are your orders?" Zoroth closed his yellow eyes for a long moment. He had never surrendered in his life. The Dominion did not surrender. Surrender was weakness, and weakness was death. But as he looked around at his remaining crew, at the young officers and soldiers who still looked to him for guidance, he realized something. Pride was not worth their lives. His honor was not worth their deaths. "Open a channel," he said quietly. "Broadcast on all frequencies." The transmission went out across the battlefield. "This is Supreme Commander Zoroth of the Valorian Dominion. Our fleet is destroyed. Our forces are defeated. I offer unconditional surrender." The guns fell silent across the battlefield. Thousands of escape pods drifted among the wreckage of destroyed ships. The Valorian Dominion, which had ruled 17 star systems with iron authority, had been broken in a single day. Katie disconnected from the architect weapon and collapsed back in her chair, exhaustion overwhelming her. Nathan was there to catch her, holding her steady as the tension of battle finally released. "We did it," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "We actually did it." Katie managed a weak smile. "We had help." The next few weeks were filled with negotiations, celebrations, and challenges that nobody had anticipated. Representatives from the 17 coalition species gathered on Earth to discuss the future. The Valorian Dominion was dissolved, its conquered worlds granted independence. Supreme Commander Zorath and his surviving officers were taken into custody to face trial for their crimes. Dr. Samuel Grant found himself at the center of countless meetings as scientists from different species shared their knowledge of architect technology. They compared notes, exchanged discoveries, and began to piece together a more complete picture of the civilization that had seeded the galaxy with their gifts. The architects had been a peaceful species once, before they discovered the power to alter reality. They had used that power to build an empire of unimaginable beauty and complexity. But over time, they had grown arrogant. They had pushed further and further, trying to reshape the universe according to their own desires. The warnings they left behind told the story of their fall. Reality, they discovered, had limits. Pushed too hard against those limits, and reality pushed back. The architects had tried to alter fundamental constants on a galactic scale, and the fabric of existence had torn itself apart in response. Their final act had been to scatter their technology across the stars, hoping that future species would learn from their mistakes. They had left instructions for limited use only, never to exceed certain boundaries, never to push too far. Katie spent long hours talking with pilots from other species who had learned to operate architect weapons. They shared techniques and experiences, forming bonds that crossed the boundaries of biology and culture. The relay pilot was a being of pure energy, contained in a crystalline shell. The Thornback operator was a creature with 8 limbs and eyes that saw in colors humans could not perceive. The Verdani controller was actually a collective consciousness of thousands of tiny organisms working together. All of them had felt the same things Katie had felt when connecting to the architect technology. All of them had glimpsed the infinite complexity of reality. All of them carried the scars of that experience. "The architects gave us a gift," Katie told the first meeting of the Coalition Council, "but they also gave us a responsibility. We have the power to defend ourselves, but we must never use that power the way they did. We must never become conquerors ourselves." President Hannah Cole stood before the council and proposed a charter for the new coalition. No species would use architect technology to dominate others. All would share their knowledge freely. Together, they would explore the galaxy peacefully, seeking the other caches the architects had left behind, building a civilization worthy of the legacy they'd inherited. The charter was adopted unanimously, 3 months after the battle. Katie stood on the observation deck of Earth's new orbital station and watched the stars. Ships from a dozen different species moved through the space around her, trading goods, exchanging personnel, building something new together. Nathan joined her at the window, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" he asked. Eventually, Katie thought about the question. She thought about the architects who had risen to impossible heights and then destroyed themselves. She thought about the Valorians who had built an empire on conquest and cruelty. She thought about humanity, just taking its first steps into a galaxy that was suddenly much larger and much stranger than anyone had imagined. "I think that's up to us," she said finally. "The architects gave us their technology, but they also gave us a warning. We can use their power to build something wonderful, or we can make the same mistakes they did. The choice is ours." Nathan nodded slowly. "So what do you choose?" Katie looked out at the stars, at the ships of a dozen species working together, at the future that stretched out before them, full of possibilities, both wonderful and terrible. "I choose hope," she said. "I choose to believe that we can be better than the ones who came before us. I choose to believe that this is the beginning of something beautiful, not the end of everything." Nathan smiled and raised his coffee cup. "To new beginnings, then." Katie touched her cup to his. "Two new beginnings." Outside, the stars burned on, ancient and eternal. Somewhere among them, the ruins of the architect's civilization waited to be discovered, full of wonders and warnings. And somewhere else, other species were just beginning to find the caches hidden on their worlds. Other pilots were learning to touch the fabric of reality. The story of the galaxy was just beginning, and humanity had earned its place in that story. Not through conquest or domination, but through courage, sacrifice, and the simple refusal to give up even when all seemed lost. The architects had been certain they would last forever. The Valorians had been certain of victory. But humanity had taught the galaxy an important lesson on that day when the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. Never underestimate a species that refuses to surrender. "Katie." Morgan turned from the window and walked back into the station, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Behind her, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small creatures who lived among them, but now just a little bit. Brighter with the promise of hope, the war was over. The real adventure was about to begin.